Hello, I'm Mark Reddick, and this is the first episode of the Emergent Approaches series. The big question of this series is, how can we create together? The way we create, see a situation together, imagine together, try different things together, that practice is part of this hopeful and terrible time. How we create is full of possibility for better ways for us to live together or for continuing the harms of the old ways. Repeat the same kind of process, get the same kind of result. And that's the reason for our question, how can we create together? If we want to create a more equitable, thriving, life-sustaining, loving world, how do we work together? In this episode, we'll look at the big picture of this question, the lay of the land. I want to offer a kind of map, a map of the landscape of creating together. It's not a model, it's not the truth, but I find it useful for conversation, the landscape of creating together. So let's start with the vertical here, which is social scale. It's the range of answers we might give to the question, what scale do you intend to have impact? So at the bottom is just individuals. Go up a bit and we have groups of individuals, families and teams, and groups of friends. And then above that, groups of groups. A lot of organizations fit that model, and so do a lot of local systems, like the local food system. And all the way at the top, and I know there's a lot of room and difference and nuance in between here. But at the top, we've got systems made of systems, all the way up to national and global scale. And of course, it's a truth of social complexity that everything is entangled. You and I are shaped by our families and friends and networks, and that happens in larger structures like schools and cities, and those are all participants in nations and in global society. It's made of us, and we're made of it. So yeah, it's complex. And it's also true that when we start work or think about our work, we can choose to set our intentions somewhere on this scale. And knowing that everything's entangled, we can try to be wise about where to begin. If a project has to do with crime, do we focus on individuals that break the law? Some approaches focus on families or neighborhoods or schools or whole cities. There's people that work on the national criminal justice system. So we have a question about what granularity or social scale might best serve our intention. Well, now let's add the other part of the territory. Across this map is depth of impact. So what effect do we intend our work to have? So here on the left, we just have fixed problems. Sometimes that's the work. It's important work, like fixing problems for individuals. I want to fix a leak in your plumbing or give you an aspirin for your headache. And then fixing problems for groups of people and organizations. There's whole industries that sit there. And as we go up, things become more difficult. Business accounting is more difficult than personal accounting. Well, things become so difficult it's hard to find good examples. Fixing problems at nation scale, I'm not sure it's possible to diagnose at that scale, though people sure do seem to try. Well, no matter the scale, in this problem-fixing column, there's a short-term relationship between who has the problem and who addresses it. And there's a kind of dependency. If I have a problem, I have to come to you to get it fixed. I have to depend on what you can provide because I can't fix the problem by myself. And once it's fixed, I probably won't see you until I have the problem again. So let's move to the right. If I fix your problem, we haven't really talked about why did you have that problem? If you had that, I fixed your headache, but why did you have a headache in the first place? So now it's not how can I fix it, but how can I support you in being healthy? Healthy people and groups. Thank you, doctor and coach and personal trainer, to help me develop habits that support my continuing health. But of course, health doesn't only apply to physical or emotional health. we have this broad idea of health. Like maybe someone helps you get better at managing money or helps you become a better writer. I don't know exactly what word to use for that, so I chose health. But a thing is that health happens over time, and there's a longer relationship and more of a conversation and more of a process involved in this column. And then the higher we go, the more difficult it becomes. There's plenty of services aimed at this scale, help the schools, families, businesses, help them function and be successful in their own terms. And then, up here, again, it's so hard. Right now in the United States, we're having this messy many national conversations across all these scales about so many aspects of our culture. And I mention that because it has to do with the difference between the fixed problems column and the nurture health column. Those big conversations are difficult partly because we don't always notice when we're trying to address a long-term nurturing challenge with the tools of short-term problem solving. Okay, there's one more column, one more stretch into where our intentions might reach as we create together. I'm calling it resilience. Again, it's hard to find a word that signals what I'm talking about without also bringing up baggage along with it. I thought about calling it wholeness, but here's what I mean. Let's say we've made, great progress in a healthy community in our city. The conditions are in place for things like education and safety and peace and wealth and so on, this definition of health. But this column asks, can it last? What happens when things change, when there's a crisis or community trauma? People come and go and leadership changes. Does the community have the capacity to respond or to heal? Or has the health come through a set of dependencies on outside institutions and services and experts? I've labeled the scales in this column with the term self-healing groups and organizations and systems. There's an organization here in Pittsburgh called the Neighborhood Resilience Project. It was founded by Father Paul Abernathy, an Iraq War veteran and Orthodox priest who lives and serves in a mostly Black and underserved neighborhood. His work brought him into regular contact with people of all ages who had repeatedly experienced trauma in multiple forms: hunger, abuse, homelessness, lack of opportunity, racism, lack of health care, violence. He saw that those traumas had shaped the neighborhood. The project's website describes Abernathy's intention this way: understanding that trauma was the greatest barrier facing the development of his community, Abernathy began to ask the question, how do you heal an entire community that has been inundated with trauma for generations? I bring this up as an example of moving up and to the right. Father Paul and his small group of community members began listening to people in their homes. They quickly encountered clear, short-term needs. The gas is shut off, and winter is coming. That problem needs a quick fix, and paying the bill is an answer. But fixing problems without grappling with the bigger history and patterns of the neighborhood would simply create more short-term dependency. It would feed people's sense of powerlessness. So Father Paul and his team began working with an approach they call trauma-informed community development. It's a move up and to the right on this map. They found people in the neighborhood who were willing to start checking in on their neighbors, and they gave them training. Micro-communities formed, just a city block or two or three in which neighbors were getting better at caring for one another. And over time, the number of these people increased, and local leaders emerged. I'm giving a short description of something that's complex and alive and has grown there over the last decade. My point is that this is an example of operating across this map. Meet immediate individual and family needs in a way that increases the overall health of the community while growing its capacity to care for itself and respond to surprises. One example, when COVID broke out, these leaders and micro communities, they call them, were key in helping people in the neighborhood understand and receive vaccination. And that was no small effort. And lastly, the Neighborhood Resilience Project is now a training center for communities in other cities to adopt trauma-informed community development. And that's a lovely move upwards on our landscape of co-creation and starting to touch on nation scale. How do we create together? Well, that's one answer from people who've extended their intentions up and to the right, solving problems, nurturing health, building resilience. They're working to care for people and repair old harms while increasing the community's power of self-care and self-healing. Let's talk about what it means to move on this landscape. In future episodes, we'll look at examples of approaches. But how will we recognize if we're looking at a promising approach? The main thing is that we move from the land of clarity, where we can agree on problems simply by studying them, and we enter the territory of complexity and emergence. I mean something formal by that word complexity. Social systems are, the term is complex adaptive systems. Their qualities have emerged from the tens of thousands, millions of interactions between the people who participate in them. And these patterns have a history. It's more accurate to think of a school or a church or a family or Walmart not as a thing, but as a process. And they're made of people who are themselves processes. We're all in the process of becoming the next version of ourselves. So, up and to the right, relationships and conversations are the key to how we see and work. What does that mean for how we create together? In the lower left, we can look at a challenge and either recognize it as something we already know how to solve or figure it out with the right analysis and expertise. And then we can get the right tool. Often a recipe or common practice will serve. And we can act like designers and architects or engineers or carpenters and achieve a good solution. Not always, but often. But keep moving on the map, and we enter a land where those things will not serve. The work requires us to look at patterns and conditions, biases, stories, beliefs, habits of relationship, ways of seeing and being. We have encountered complexity while holding in our hand the tools of problem solving. So when the model is clear, when we can identify the cause and effect in play, we can depend on the experts to figure it out, and we can trust our tools. But what's the approach in complexity? The fact that I can't give a similar formula for complexity is a signal that we don't understand this part of the territory so well. What do we need to add to our palette of approaches and methods and skills so we're more competent and confident at nurturing health and doing so at an appropriate scale? And how can we become wiser in discerning which column, which part of the map better suits the nature of the challenge? Well, before I introduce some clues about that, I need to show you one more thing. We've been looking at this map from the top, but if we turn it, we discover there is another dimension, a hidden dimension, too often neglected, but critical to our work. If I sell you an aspirin or an iPhone, I don't need to know whether you live alone or still struggle with memories of childhood bullying. I can serve you in a shallow transaction, and that can be the beginning and end of our relationship. But when we look under the surface, we quickly find that everything's connected, and people are far more complex than they appear in economic models or designers' archetypes. Down here, inside each of us, is a darker, more poetic and mythic aspect of being. So if I want to serve your health, I need to go deeper. There's so many invisible things that contribute to health and well-being. And over here on the right, where people become more able to engage with difficulty and heal and repair relationships and community. Over here, this word resilience really only makes sense in community with others. There we're working with human becoming and moving through difficulty, and that touches us deeply. And it happens over time among people in lasting relationship. As intentions move to the right, the work gets deeper. Are we increasing school funding? Well, that's probably a problem-fixing move. We want educational health in a community. There's almost certainly some healing and relationship repair that's required. And that's roots and soil work. There's trauma down there. There can be healing too. Where there's othering and distancing and disconnection, there can be connection and belonging. But how do we create together? We're looking for ways of working that serve us in complexity. Over the last 12 years, I've been making two collections. One is a list of qualities that we need in our ways of co-creating that work with complexity rather than trying to solve it. The other is a collection of stories and approaches to co-creation that seem to have those qualities. I'll introduce those in a future episode, but first here's one version of the list of qualities. It isn't exhaustive. Surely there are others. I'm speaking as an older white man with a history of work in the corporate world, universities, and nonprofits. That's the lens I bring. And while I'm trying on new lenses all the time, I feel it's important for me to say that this whole thing, this map and the qualities I'm about to list, come from my perspective and experience at this point in my life. And if I've learned anything, it's that we need to be putting our perspectives and experiences together. And that's the first quality on the list. How do we create together? We need to include the diversity of the system, the community, the organization. There's a lot packed into that word include. We have a lot to learn and practice here. And since I'm speaking partly to an audience of designers, I'll emphasize the point that this work means a new role for creative experts. When the work is to shift social patterns, the people that live the old patterns must be the ones who live into the new ones. How can we help communities become able to create for themselves rather than defaulting to creating for them? Work with power, oppression, trauma. We need people who can hold space for this. We need to learn what trauma-informed looks like in co-creation. Can we unlearn the habit of rushing into doing and making without noticing that something else is needed? Can we learn to tend to the roots and soil of emotion and relationship and being that are the underlying source of co-creation? Listen and see together. No single point of view is sufficient to see what's really going on. In complexity, we're working with patterns, not problems. And listening together is different than sending experts out for research. What does it look like to support a community in learning to see its own patterns and possibilities? The further you go up and to the right, the more it's true that uncertainty is a fact of life. The normal state is going to be, we're not sure what to do. So we need approaches that help us keep walking when we're not sure, ways to experiment or probe our way through the dark woods, where we may know what direction we want to travel, but we can only see far enough to take a few steps together. Those of us who grew up in the problem-solving, product-making, service-providing world tend to believe that unless there's a product or service, things aren't getting done. We like outcomes we can see. But when the work is to shift patterns of power, or story or relationship, or to grow creative capacity in some slice of community, relationships come first. As I've seen over and over through the past decade, sometimes more right relationship is the most potent outcome. Our inheritance as problem solvers is that we tend to take things in project-sized bites. 3 months. Funding for 2 years. That's unusual. So we aren't used to holding structures for co-creation that can endure and adapt through many years. The further we travel on our map, the longer things tend to take. Some of this work will span generations. Can we improve our ability to nurture long-haul adaptive leadership as part of the work of co-creation? So we have quite the wonderful challenge to weave theory and practice of co-creation in ways that embrace complexity and emergence, and that embrace the depths of human community, including the dark places, including our unconscious collective and personal habits of mind and work. We're just beginning to glimpse what that can look like. We really don't know how to do this. It feels too big. And of course, it is too big for any one of us. But we can each choose to participate in our way as best we can. We'll learn together by trying over and over and talking to each other about it. I find that thrilling. What a time to be alive. Thank you for listening.